So the Beyond Discipline is a series that is arts and science, Faculty of Arts and Science, and trying to bring people together in a way that we can discuss across our disciplines, across our fields, on themes that might seem a bit different, or if they're not different, that we bring a different perspective to it. Now, tonight we're going to talk about senses. The whole idea started with something that we discussed after a scholar from Buffalo last year came, and she was about soundscapes and geomatics, locating sounds in space, and how we relate to this. And I'm a geographer. So when I saw that, I said, I never thought really of soundscapes, really, but we have sounds all around us. So we discussed internally about soundscape, and the soundscape is great, and we have people who will talk about soundscape. But then I said, well, but the whole experience, human experience, is more about the senses, all the senses. So he said, yeah, why don't we think about sensescapes? So it started in discussion internally with Liz and other people, and we thought, yes, let's do that. Now, one thing about senses is that we have to use them. And tonight, there's a bit of a different kind of twist to the usual panel thing. There's going to be more of experimenting about senses. And as a scientist, you know, when we teach methodologies, we always start with empiricism. Empiricism starts with the senses. You start with, you know, looking, observing, hearing, and all of that. And we come to question our senses, our scientists, a lot. What did I see? I'm just looking at Claudine. I was actually laughing because that's part of the questioning about our own senses. But then senses in research is critical, not just from a scientific point of view, but it's also critical for all of us who are engaged in research. But also it's how the research on senses is informing how we understand our own connection with the analysis that the brain is doing. So all of this is embedded in what we're going to sort of, I'd say, live tonight as a Beyond Discipline, right? It's more of a living experience than it is of just hearing or... So I'm pleased that so many people responded to the call of participating tonight, and I'll introduce right away David House, who's Director of Center on Sensory Studies from the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. He'll be our Master of Ceremony tonight. So David, thank you for accepting to champion this and to be part of this experience, and I'll leave it to you to lead us through our senses. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Andre, for that introduction. And when we were casting about for a title for tonight's talk, we first of all came up with Get in Touch with Your Senses. But that's trademarked, and so we had to scratch that one. We then came up with Explore Your Senses, but that too is taken by the Greek Tourism Board. And therefore we latched on to Come to Your Senses, which is still in the public domain as far as we know. And so we're not, no copyright infringement is happening with our use of that particular title. Now, this slide is about sensory tourism. The one from Peer Imports was about sensory marketing. And in that regard, both of these are expressions of what could be called the commodification of sensation. And that's one of the topics that we indeed study at the Center for Sensory Studies. And in that regard, it's just one of many, as you'll see. Now, the origin of the Center for Sensory Studies actually dates back to 1988 and the foundation of what was called the Concordia Sensoria Research Team. It brought together 3 core members, Constance Claassen, a cultural historian, Anthony Sinnott, a sociologist, and myself, an anthropologist. And what? No psychologist? What's wrong with this team? What do they think they're doing? And indeed, that's one of the questions that we addressed. We wanted to look at the social life of the senses as opposed to the mental life of the senses. We wanted to look at the interface between sense organ and world instead of sense organ and brain. And hence this very sort of strong emphasis on the social construction of the senses and the way in which the senses are mediated in that way. Now, that's been since really the sensorial revolution of the 1990s, when you find all these social science disciplines converging on the sensorium and taking it over from psychologists. That led us to sort of coin the phrase sensory studies to refer to this new interdisciplinary area. And since 2012, there has been a Center for Sensory Studies here at Concordia. It spans 3 of the 4 faculties of the university. It includes 6 different departments: marketing, sociology and anthropology, art history, communication studies, and design art. And indeed, we also have a token psychologist. Okay? And actually, that token psychologist is not so token at all. He's one of the most brilliant psychologists I know, and we'll be hearing from him later tonight, so I won't say anything more about Aaron Johnson, who we're very proud to count amongst our number. And he supports the field of psychology and actually absorbs and transcends all of our attacks on the discipline, which I think really makes our sort of center very much interdisciplinary, but also with a strong sense of rivalry. So in addition to focusing on the social life of the senses and on sensory marketing, we study multisensory aesthetics. And Cynthia Hammond from the Department of Art History will be addressing this issue in part when she speaks later this evening. There's also a 4th area that we've been opening up recently, thanks to the presence of Piet Devos as a postdoctoral fellow at the center. Piet will also be talking later, and I just want to mention that Piet actually organized a panel at a huge conference that we had last week, the IVLA, International Visual Literacy Association. What he organized a panel on was on the topic of the distorting mirror of blindness, visual literacy, and non-sighted aesthetics. The IVLA had never encountered blindness before, and Piet, with his panel, sort of exposed another whole way of thinking about sight, never mind blindness, thanks to that. It was an extraordinary showing, and he and Florian will be talking later tonight. Now, we could have entertained you all by ourselves tonight because we are so interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary as a center, but actually there's an extraordinary diversity and richness of sense-based research, which is how I understand it, going on here at Concordia. And so we opened the door to a whole series of fellow travelers. And the first one up tonight is Rona Richmond-Keneally from the Department of Design and Computation Arts, who will be leading us into the realm of taste. And I want to emphasize all of your senses are going to be stimulated tonight, every one of them.
Fantastic. Well, I'm delighted to have been invited to participate. Most of you know that I wear 2 hats. I'm a professor in the Department of Design and Computation Arts, but I'm also a fellow in the School of Canadian Irish Studies. So I'm absolutely thrilled, as I say, to be here amongst you tonight. And my question is, how can the taste of something as experienced be captured and communicated, given that that sense experience cannot be shared as readily as a sight or sound can, for example? And there's a little adjacent question. Why is this a challenge worth exploring? 2 years ago, last June, I was in Italy, specifically in the Marche, in a little village called Francavilla d'Ete, and I met a cherry. We were walking in the fields. There was a cherry tree, and because it was June, the tree was abundantly laden, and I pulled off a cherry, and I put it in my mouth, and something happened. The world went black. I couldn't see anything. My tinnitus got so loud that I couldn't hear anything. And my whole being was focused on what was going on in my mouth. There was an explosion that made my mouth feel bigger than it was. My tongue went into raptures. The textures, the difference between the juiciness, the mass of the meat, the hardness of the pit, it just overwhelmed me. I couldn't think, breathe, live past that moment. And it has eluded me ever since. We were in Italy again this summer. Vignola in Reggio Emilia, supposed to be the place, the cherry capital of the universe. I didn't want to tell them. It wasn't the same. The question is this: how can I even begin to grasp, never mind communicate, because I don't think I did a good job of it, the sensorial experience of what was going on in my mouth in a few short moments? Certainly not by this, or by this, which is ciliegia, which is how you say cherry in Italian, a word which certainly does not sit as comfortably in my mouth as that memorable little fruit did. And this, I'm sorry to say, doesn't do it either. Pondering this question, I actually get closest when I look at this photo that I took on the same trip of a field right next to the cherry tree, where one outlier sunflower signaled its agency to me, and you can see it in the center. I move into recall mode for different reasons when I hold my favorite little knife in my hand, and I would normally bring the knife, but to bring a knife into a classroom in a university, not so smart. Because I had that knife with me in Francavilla, and because I subsequently used it when I picked more cherries and pitted them, and we had them to eat afterward. But these markers only work for me. What markers can work in a broader context, I ask myself, and I'm asking you now, inviting you to consider that question. For others to share, for example. How can we communicate aspects of taste? More to the point, how can I, as a designer and design researcher, help facilitate the capture of sensory experiences of taste? One way that designers do so is to riff on the resources of language, words, visual, spatial language, already directed toward taste. So, for example, according to Alan Weiss, here's what he says about taste. Quote, taste is simultaneously subjective, objective, and qualificative. According to context, he says, taste means the sense by which we distinguish flavors, the flavors themselves, an appetite for such preferred flavors, the discriminative activity according to which an individual likes or dislikes certain sensations, the sublimation of such value judgments as they pertain to art and ultimately to all experience, and by extension and ellipsis, taste implies good taste and style established by means of an intuitive faculty of judgment, unquote. So in this advertisement, in an Irish women's magazine, ostensibly for refrigerators, the ad I should say, but really meant to stimulate the acceptance of modern kitchen technology during a period of intense electrification, taste is communicated as the intersection between the savor of chilled foods, specifically chilled beverages, the good taste of what we now call mid-century modern decor and the mod cons that came with it, the cool style of sitting around having cocktails, and even the sanctioned fashion of the period, namely the Jackie Kennedy-inspired dress and hairdo. This was 1963. In my remaining time, however, I would like to move my taste task in a different direction, namely to explore how designers can undertake research creation work to explore experiences of taste, and to do so in order to bring into higher relief crucial food matters of today, ranging from health, food security, and environmental ecology to how food constructs and anchors individual or community identity. Design theorists Fiona Raby and Anthony Dunn use the concept of speculative design to open up a domain of investigation that can be fruitful for this purpose. Their focus is not to try to forecast new trends or technologies, not speculative in that way, but rather to, quote, apply designerly strategies and processes to create new design, new experimental creations that intentionally disrupt didactic or even moralistic thinking. Speculative design, they say, creates opportunities for discussion and debate about alternative ways of being, and to inspire and encourage people's imaginations to flow freely, unquote. So how might designers make work about taste with these goals in mind? Here is a project submitted by one of my students, Zoe Wanfor, in a Never Mind Beyond Disciplines, but Beyond Faculties cross-listed course between the School of Canadian Irish Studies and my Department of Design and Computation Arts. It started with her curiosity about that most ubiquitous taste of Ireland, the potato, derived from a 1950s cookbook meant to frame an Irish cuisine. Zoe was fascinated by a recipe for boiled potatoes that had been included in the cookbook. Overlaying her thoughts about this recipe with what she was concurrently learning about the Great Irish Famine of the mid-19th century, Zoe decided to dig deeply into the significance of this diet staple and its centrality in the Irish national narrative by casting her own potatoes out of bronze. These sculptures, by defamiliarizing this food product using traditional aesthetic methods, gave each potato, a singularity, a focus, and a preciousness that aligned the sculptures in powerful ways with how those tubers were perceived during famine times. As you can see, other famine commemorative monuments seek to capture the results of food deprivation rather than the experience of the deprivation itself. Zoe's bronze potatoes, however, bring us closer to the complexity of the experience in terms of taste, mouthfeel, hardness, temperature, smell, which is of course part of taste, to reinforce the intensity of multiple facets of what it must have been like to live in constant fear of starvation. There is an invocation of the multiple sensations of taste, of smelling and having to watch while the potato is being cooked and wait for it to be ready, of how much you would or wouldn't actually taste if you're desperately hungry and scarfing it down, of feeling its heat as it approaches your face and in your mouth, of feeling its remnants on your tongue after it's swallowed, of the welcome stomach discomfort after eating an intentionally only partially cooked potato because that discomfort suppressed hunger pangs, of the saliva spraying through your mouth while watching it being consumed by someone else. I would argue that this makes the famine intimate and personal, and thereby possibly helps to build empathy for others who are denied, and indeed are denied today, essential food security. Here's one of the potatoes, and it weighs over 0.5 kilogram. It's a complete defamiliarization of potato-ness. Finally, why is the challenge to capture and convey the sense of taste important? Talking about the connections between food and place, the concept of local food, Laura DeLinde argues that an important goal for food studies researchers is to find possible ways in which, quote, food advocates and in which food advocates and activists, academics, practitioners, policymakers, farmer and consumer organizations can learn to see, record, and argue for the value of the emotive, the cultural, the spiritual, collectively termed non-rational, the embedded, the vernacular, or the embodied, to make a case for the independence of the cultural and the biological, the sensual and the scientific. How does that further my own mandate and motives as a designer, a researcher, a compassionate human? I believe that mindful tasting and eating and mindful thinking about tasting and eating brings the focus to stimuli that can generate profound food experiences for the eater, cook, and by extension, other stakeholders implemented across the systems and networks of food production and consumption. Such mindfulness fuels possibilities of community and identity building, including commensality, as a result of shared food interactions and narratives. It creates opportunities to enhance gustatory pleasure by prompting broad spectrum recognition and reflection, cognitive, sensorial, emotional, visceral, and appreciation of what one eats and where and how. It can therefore also be a crucial component in the transmission of gastronomic knowledge and legacy, and support the fostering of ecosophic ideals by precipitating an ongoing concern about how to preserve the uniqueness or availability or local or cultural affiliations between that taste, that food, and the realm in which it is implicated. Thank you.
So I'm Claudine Gauthier. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Physics, and today I'm going to talk about a slightly different topic about how we could measure what we see, or any sense really, but I'm talking about vision in this case. So if we're seeing something, so a stimulus of some kind, then the light reflecting off this stimulus or coming from this stimulus will activate the rods and the cones in your eyes, and then this will be translated into an electrical signal in the optic nerve, and then this will go into your brain, towards the back of your brain, in fact, in the part of the brain that's called the occipital cortex. And this is where you'll start the processing of trying to make sense of what you're seeing. So one thing that's interesting about the brain is that it's a very energy-intensive organ. So the brain is about 2% of the body weight, but uses 20% of the energy. And interestingly, it also doesn't store any energy, which means that at any time, it requires a lot of blood to come to the brain to really fuel all that activity. And that comes in the shape of glucose and oxygen, mostly. And therefore, this blood flow coming to the brain is a very important component of neuronal activity, and it's regulated very closely by a whole variety of mechanisms. And the link between this neuronal activity and this blood flow is called neurovascular coupling. And this is basically what we measure when we measure brain activity using magnetic resonance imaging. So magnetic resonance imaging is when you put somebody in a giant magnet and you use the fact that different tissues, different parts of the brain have different magnetic properties to try to understand something about it. So we can measure many things with MRI. It's a very versatile tool, so we can measure things like brain structure, we can measure the connection between different parts of the brain, we can measure the structure of blood vessels, and we can also measure brain activity. And we measure brain activity using what we call functional MRI. It's also called BOLD, for blood oxygen level dependent signal. And the reason why we can measure brain activity using this fMRI signal is because the protein that carries oxygen to your brain has different magnetic properties depending on if it's taking oxygen to your brain or if it's taking carbon dioxide back out towards your lungs. So basically, when it's carrying carbon dioxide, it has some magnetic properties that allow us to see it. So the way this works in terms of neuronal activity is when your brain is active, when the neurons are active, they're using oxygen. So this happens all the time, right? This thing about 10% of you using 10% of your brain, that's not true. You always use all your brain. But sometimes you use a part of your brain more when you're doing a task. And when that happens, so not only is there some deoxyhemoglobin from just using your brain all the time, but now on top of it, you have a bit more deoxyhemoglobin that's being created by the fact that you're using some oxygen. Now, the fact that you've used some of this oxygen means that this whole cascade of mechanisms happens so that blood vessels will dilate. So they'll increase their diameter to bring more fresh blood to that brain area. And what we're measuring using fMRI is basically the difference between what your brain is doing when it's doing its normal thing and what your brain is doing when it's doing that special task, right? So it's only the difference between those two things, that extra blood that's coming to the brain. So that's kind of the general idea of how we would measure the activity that's going on in your brain when you're seeing something, right? Now, what happens when we age? So this is from a study where we compared younger and older adults doing an actual fairly complex cognitive task where they're trying to inhibit a response that they really feel like giving, to give a different response. So this is the type of task that we know older adults don't perform so well at, but that young adults perform better. But interestingly, when we compare these younger and older adults, the little red blob you see here is the only place where there was a significant difference in activity in younger adults as compared to older adults, which means younger adults have more activity in their brain in this area as compared to the rest of the brain. And this happens to be the visual area. So the way you would traditionally interpret this result is to say that either older adults probably don't see as well, and therefore their neurons are not being stimulated as much as the younger adults, or you would say that maybe their neurons are not so healthy, so that even though they're seeing the same thing, their neurons are not as active. But in fact, what we think is that maybe part of the reason why we think there's these neuronal changes in older adults is really because of the way we're measuring this. And we use many different MRI signals to try to quantify that. So to go back to our idea of neurovascular coupling and how we measure the fMRI signal, so what we're measuring is basically an indirect measure of neuronal activity, right? Because what we're measuring is the blood flow response that's related to the neuronal activity. And not only are we only measuring the blood flow, really, what we're measuring is a relative change from some baseline that we don't know, because we don't know how much activity is going on at rest in these brains, right? So if any component of blood flow or neuronal activity at baseline or during the task changes, we could interpret that basically as having a change in neuronal signaling, but that's not what it is, right? So to look at this, we used a variety of different MRI techniques. So the three that gave us something that was interesting were, first of all, the resting cerebral blood flow. So we saw that in older adults, resting cerebral blood flow was lower than in older adults. So that actually tells us that when we're measuring these neuronal activity using the fMRI signal in older adults, we're in fact overestimating how much activity there is. And this is because basically we're measuring a relative change, right? So let's say we're measuring a change of 10, right? If the baseline was 50, let's say in older adults, that would mean a 20% change. But if the baseline is 100 in younger adults, that means a percent change of 10%, right? So it would look like the older adults have much more going on than the younger adults, even though they're actually undergoing the same change. Now, the second thing that changes, and this one is a more drastic change, is cerebrovascular reactivity. So since this is a measure of how elastic blood vessels are, how much do they respond to a signal to dilate, right? So if you have the same level of neuronal activity, do you get the same response? And what we found is that older adults have a much lower response for the same amount of signaling. So that would tell us that we, in fact, underestimate how much activity is going on in older adults. So the opposite direction of what we saw before. And then finally, using some more advanced biophysical modeling, we're also able to measure basically how much activity is going on at rest in these brains. And we find that in older adults, this is also decreased slightly. And because, again, we're measuring a relative change, this would tell us that we would tend to overestimate the change. So now we have three things that change in different directions. When we actually put that all together, we find that, at least in this sample of people, older adults, in fact, have a similar level of neuronal activity as younger adults. So the fact that it looks like their brain is not as active when they're seeing something is not real. It's not really because their brain is less active. It's because we're not able to measure that properly using the tools that we usually use. And in fact, what is changed is their vasculature and their metabolism. So the good news is if you're aging, probably your brain is more active than you would have thought. The bad news is that probably your vasculature is not doing so well. And unfortunately, that's really linked to late life diseases such as dementia. So the solution to this, then, we don't have time to get into this, of course, but exercise, of course. So if you exercise, your brain is going to be much more healthy on the vascular side. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so my name's Aaron Johnson. I'm from the Department of Psychology here at Concordia University. And today I'm going to be talking about acquired age-related sensory impairment. So Canada, like many Western world societies, is facing an aging population. So this is actually demographic data from Statistics Canada from 2011. The gray bar there represents the 60 and over group. And what you'll see is that there's this lovely bulge, which is soon to be approaching. So in the next 15 years, so by 2032, the number of people over the age of 60 is going to double in Canada. So this creates a number of issues, and the one which I'm particularly interested in is how out of that number, there are a number who will develop visual and hearing impairment. So when I'm talking about visual impairment, this is defined as eyesight that cannot be corrected to normal levels. So I am visually impaired here. I can put my glasses on again, and I can see. That is not true visual impairment. Visual impairment is, even with optical correction, we cannot correct for the issue. In Quebec, we actually have a definition, and that is a visual acuity equal less than 20/60. So this is the fourth row down on an eye chart. If you can't read below that, you have a visual impairment. Roughly 1 in 10 Canadians over the age of 60 will develop a visual impairment at some point in their lifetime. The most common causes are age-related macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, and cataracts. Cataracts and glaucoma are actually treatable if they're caught early enough. With glaucoma, we can give medication. With cataract surgery now, this is a day surgery. Sooner or later, they're going to be offering it at McDonald's. It's in and out in a day now. The real worries for us, and the ones that we see most often in the clinic, are the diabetic retinopathy and age-related macular degeneration. In particular, age-related macular degeneration is the one we see most frequently. So just to show you, on the left here, we have a picture of a face and a book, and on the right, we see what happens in age-related macular degeneration. So if you can imagine right now, if you're looking at this face or you're trying to read the book, pages of the book, you're putting the image on the part of your eye that's most sensitive. This is the fovea and the macular region. That region is destroyed in age-related macular degeneration. And so obviously this has a big impact on your ability to recognize faces, to read, to see signs, navigate around your environment. Separate to this, the other common sensory impairment that we see in older adults, of course, is hearing impairment. This is basically defined as a partial inability to hear. Again, in Quebec, we have a definition, and you'll see what this is in a minute, but an average hearing loss of 30 decibels or greater in their better ear. This can be caused by a number of different issues. This can be conductive hearing loss, so the mechanism actually transmitting the sound waves from the air through your ear to the brain is damaged. The hair cells can be damaged by excessive noise. So manual laborers in particular will suffer from this. Also, for those of you who are young generation who play their iPods way too loud in their ears, this is a problem. We're actually starting to see more and more individuals come in at a younger age with hearing impairment. And presbycusis, this is age-related hearing loss. This is usually damage to the cochlear and the auditory nerve and the hair cells, which take the sound wave and transmit it as a neural signal. Those are damaged. This could be a result of antibiotics, cancer drugs, or will all kill the hair cells. So what I'm plotting here on these graphs is basically how frequency, which is basically the pitch of a sound, changes as a function of age. When we're young, which is at the top line and 20, then we have perfectly good hearing. As we start to enter into our 30s, we start actually losing our sense of hearing. So I don't know how many of you have heard that ringtone, which young kids can hear, but older adults can't. I can't. That again is a sign of that the frequency that ringtone is played at is actually too high for most of us to hear. As we get older, we start losing those high-pitched sounds faster, and particularly men more than women. So just to let you hear what this would sound like, here's some simulations of, so this would be a normal sound for someone who is in their 20s.
This year we took a canoe trip in Canada. We canoed for days with no bridges or locks, paddling all day, watching otters play in the water. The fish were almost jumping into the boat.
Okay. This is what it would sound like to someone who is in their 50s.
This year we took a canoe trip in Canada. We canoed for days with no bridges or locks, paddling all day, watching otters play in the water. The fish were almost jumping into the boat.
By the time you're 80, this is what it sounds like. Oh.
Canada. We canoed for days with no bridges or locks, paddling all day, watching otters play in the water. The fish were almost jumping into the boat.
So about 1 in 5 people in Canada will develop a hearing impairment after the age of 60. So you can see the quality of what they're actually hearing from that sentence really does change. They can hear something, but it's much harder to actually hear the details, the nuances of the voice. The double whammy is what really worries us, because what we're starting to see now is that as adults live longer, we start seeing what we call dual sensory impairment. Individuals come in with 2 or more sensory impairments. The most common is vision loss with hearing. These can be either congenital or they can be acquired due to age-related impairment. And they can range from mild loss in either sense to severe loss in both senses. This is changing over the last few years. So about 10 years ago, about 10% of the clients who we would see in a low vision clinic would fall into this dual sensory loss category. Now the numbers are much higher. So there was a study done by Wittich et al. In 2015 that showed that 53% of the clients who we see in a low vision clinic now fall under a dual sensory impairment category. And that agrees roughly with what's in America from the CDC. Just to give you, there's some consequences of this. So people with dual sensory impairment have double the incidence of difficulties doing tasks of daily living, shopping, navigating around the environment, reading. They have double the incidence of falls. They have double the mortality rate. They have triple the rates of depression, and also have quadruple the chances of getting a hip fracture. So you can see it's not just that they're losing their sense. There are a number of other knock-on effects which affect both their physical and mental health. Now, everywhere else in the world, vision and hearing services are actually treated as one dimension. They're treated separately. And it's very rare that your healthcare provider would deal with one and the other at the same time. Luckily, you all live in Quebec. We are the exception in North America in that we actually have dual sensory treatment programs. So when you come in now, you are assigned both a vision specialist and a hearing specialist who work together to help you with rehabilitation strategies. And these strategies are designed to help overcome the sensory impairment. Someone with hearing loss and someone with vision loss, it's not a complete loss. They still have function. So what we do in rehabilitation is we train them to use that remaining hearing and vision to their best ability. Often this is paired with assistive technology. Again, here in Quebec, we're very lucky. Assistive technologies are covered under RAMQ, which is the Quebec insurance. If you're in the States, you have to buy it out of your own pocket. What's interesting for us, though, is that most of the devices out there right now are based on what we call deafblind. So these are people who have lost both senses completely. They're not designed for individuals who have some function in either sense. So just to show you some of the devices which are given out. For vision impairment on the right, we have this big clunky CCTV which you can put on your desk. You can put a book underneath and you can actually magnify and enlarge the text, which makes it easy to use in your remaining vision. On the right here, we have things like a talking clock, a talking watch. These are very useful devices where you can get visual information transferred to sound. However, this is a problem because if you've got hearing loss, you can't hear the thing. Not only that, so the hearing-assisted devices, such as hearing aid or an audio amplifier, are very finicky little things with little buttons and little switches where you have to change the battery, which has a small plus and minus sign on it. So again, if you have a visual impairment, they're really difficult to use as well. And this is the problem. At the moment, the technology doesn't exist to help compensate for either sense. And this is a problem because it leads to high rates of abandonment. So just here on the island of Montreal alone, somewhere between $4 and $9 million worth of assistive technology will end up in a drawer after 6 months because of one of three things. One, there's an expectation. When we give a device to someone, they expect it to have their hearing or their vision return completely to normal and they can go about their lives. That never occurs. The second is the use. Using these devices sometimes requires training. It requires maintenance, and so this is sometimes not done. Finally, there's a stigma sometimes associated with some of these devices. People don't want to be seen using them because it attracts attention to them and highlights them as someone who is visually impaired or hearing impaired. And so the research which we do at Concordia looks at different aspects of this. And I could go on all night, but I just want to highlight two particular studies. One is looking at reading. Reading is important because it's the most common reason why people are referred to a rehabilitation clinic for either low vision or for dual sensory impairment. And it's also the main target of rehabilitation therapy because it's something we can measure, it's something we can say, oh, look, you can read better now with our device, with our training, therefore we have done a good job. Right now, the gold standard here, like everywhere else in the world, is the CCTV. This is this big desktop type thing where you can put the book underneath. This is big, this is bulky, this is very, very expensive. So we've been looking at alternatives. In particular, we've been using the Apple iPad. These wonderful, powerful computers which are portable, they're lightweight, they're cheap, they're hip, in that everyone has one now. And so it doesn't attract stigma to you for using one. You know, you've probably all been to concerts or, you know, I went to Disney last year. People pull out their iPads and take photographs. It's completely normal to pull out an iPad in society. What's important as well is we've actually shown with studies, we've actually got 3 studies now, which have each shown that the iPad is as good as the current technology for a fraction of the cost, and it's portable. And the other thing as well is that you can do a lot more than just read. You can do remote therapy. You can access information on the internet, all of which you can be done by enlarging the text or even having the text read to you through the text-to-speech function on an iPad. Like I said, maintenance is an important part in learning to use these devices. This is what we call the quick guide for one of our devices. This is actually for a telephone. The actual manual is 162 pages, written in this tiny, tiny little font. Not surprisingly, I suffer from techno joy. Whenever I get a new toy, I throw away the manual and I just stop playing with it. For older adults, they like to know how to use things properly. When they read this, it's very difficult for them to read. And so we actually said, well, hang on. Instead of just giving a device to someone and saying, go use it, go maintain it, what if we actually showed them? So just to show you, this is a sort of device. This is actually a pocket talker, pocket amplifier. This is almost like a cheap hearing aid. So it has a small box on the left with a microphone that plugs into just a pair of headphones and allows you to amplify the sound. So as you can see here, there's a small on-off button, there's a volume switch on the side, there's a battery compartment, and you have to plug the headphones into the socket. The little green dot here is just someone moving their eyes around, looking at this in normal situation. And then what will happen in a second is I'm going to put up and simulate what it would look like to someone who has a visual impairment. So this is blocking out the center. So you can see now the green dot's still centered where the person's looking, but we block out that information. So given all this, how does that affect our ability to use the device? Well, not surprisingly, when they first start off, up on the top here, we have, on the y-axis, we have how long it takes them to do a task. And basically, it's put the headphone socket in the device and turn the device on. These are all they've had time to experience to use this and learn how to use it. When we first do this with them, it takes a long time. So for someone who has good visual sight, this would take 20 seconds. For someone who is visually impaired or dual sensory impaired, this takes 45 seconds to do. We then put in an intervention. The intervention is an untrained undergraduate student who then tells people, this is how you put it together. And they show them. Just by doing that, we drop how long it takes to do the task from 45 seconds to 30 seconds. So just a simple act of explaining how to use these devices, how to maintain them, improves the performance and how long it takes them to actually use these devices. So these small interventions, which seem like, of course you're going to show someone how to use a device, are important because we get better use out of them. So for more information about this and other studies that we've run, you can go to our website, which is at cvl.concordia.ca. Thank you.
So, good evening. My name is Piet Devos. I'm a Belgian postdoc, and I'm here affiliated to the Center of Sensory Studies, which David already introduced in his introduction.
Hello, my name is Florian Grond. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at McGill in the Input Device and Music Interaction Laboratory.
Yeah, so before we actually start our talk, we will first let you listen to a recording we've made. So I guess that what you just heard are just a series of sounds to you, not very meaningful. Well, that's actually the problem, because for me they are very meaningful. Because they are. This is recording of one of my own walks when I actually leave the whole building. But my question was actually, how can I, as a blind person, communicate my experience of a soundscape to other people, and then mainly sighted people who are not used to navigating a city just relying on sound and tactile cues, so using a cane, for instance. It's not so easy to find a way. You could, of course, what I've mainly done is describe your experience in text, but these just remain words, and it can help to explain what you're doing, but that doesn't really will transfer the experience to the to your audience. You could, of course, try to simulate the experience, but simulation can be productive, but you have also to be very careful with simulating disabilities. Why is that problematic? It can be problematic if because it usually focuses just on on what you've lost. It only shows you what people doesn't see or hear anymore, and it doesn't necessarily bring to the attention of the audience the kind of new sensory skills you will develop over time and help you to get around. So if we would say we would simulate this experience very naively, and for example blindfold sighted people, give them a cane, send them onto the streets, and ask them afterwards what the experience was about, well, they will say, well, it's really difficult or it's just impossible. So actually you get nonsense results. So this won't work. You could also think, okay, I will use this technology. I was myself at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands involved in a project 10 years ago with students of Anthropology making a film about my navigation of a place. And they would follow me with a camera and so filming my daily commute from home to the university. The problem was with this experiment that actually, it felt afterwards that this film didn't represent my experience. Because, of course, you follow me with a camera, so you have a third-person perspective on me. And it doesn't really, you see me crossing the street, but it doesn't really show how I actually take the decision to cross the street. So the auditory skills and tactile skills are just not being recorded. And of course I could, and we did for the film, I added some comments, and so this made it in some way a representation, but it still felt as lacking. I actually needed a much more like a participatory approach. And when I discussed this problem with so my friend and colleague Florian, who is specialist in sound studies, he came up with the idea to use binaural recordings.
Yeah, so binaural recordings, it is actually a very, very simple trick. You use two microphones and you place them very close to the ear on either side of the person who is recording. And the effect is that actually the microphones are capturing the sound field almost the same way your ears actually capture the sound field. So if you afterwards listen to this recording with headphones, it really feels like as if you were there again where you recorded the sound. So we thought that this would be actually an interesting way into better record Piet's experience of sound fields and how he navigates the city. But we also didn't only want to think about the technological part of this, I would say like ethnographic or auto-ethnographic approach. We also wanted to theorize it, and so we came up with the idea of the sonic boundary object. So what's the idea behind the sonic boundary object? So there is the from electroacoustic music, the notion of the sound object, which really tries to look into how can we make sound, which is so temporal, so ephemeral, an object of study. So this is one part of the sonic boundary object. The other part, the boundary object, is a concept from sociology, and why we thought that that was kind of an good terminology to adopt in this critical disability studies approach is because it actually highlights that can be two different group of people who share not quite the same but a similar experience, and through the use of technology, actually this you can actually support this shared experience, which otherwise might actually not be possible, because I could never say that I'm hearing the same thing like Piet, or I experience the soundscape in a similar way like Piet. But through the binaural recordings, we tried to find a way in. During the walks, the ethnographic walks that Piet made, we also decided to include a camera. Now, why would we want to use a camera? Isn't that a bit paradoxical if you want to capture a blind soundscape experience? And so to explain why we use the camera, let me borrow a line from disability scholar Georgina Gleek. She says that often you need to use the technology for a group with special needs, for the SVD group. These are the severely visually dependent. So this is actually most of us, including myself. And this was one of the very interesting experience for me in our project, that when we did the recording, which was about 40 minutes long, Piet, you of course always knew where you were in this walk, but I would for sure have been lost after maybe 2 or 3 minutes had I not had the video. So in the next step we then combine the binaural recordings with the video. And also, we wanted to not only have this kind of raw data, but also combine it actually with everything that Piet had to say about his soundscape experience when he listened to it through headphones again. And this is the next thing we would like to show you. We are continuing in the hall building, moving out onto Maisonneuve and Bishop.
But okay, I found the door now. So we're outside. There is lots of constructions going on everywhere, and so that complicates things a lot, especially at the moment when I have to cross, where there are of course already no sound signaling, so I have to do everything by hearing, and then when there is so much noise around, that makes things quite complicated to hear the direction of the traffic, because that's my main source of information when I cross. So yeah, now we hear the traffic crossing in front of us. So then I know I can't cross, of course. That's it's interesting to hear the Montreal soundscape around.
You got the grass?
Yeah, okay, it's green, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, green, good to go.
Thanks. Yeah. So that I was already thinking to go, and then this man very kindly asked me. So it often happens that people ask. Yeah, thanks. Yep.
Okay, have a good day.
You too. Very polite people here. So yeah, so I've crossed Maisonneuve now, and now I walk down. No, I will first cross Bishop, yeah. Because I hear that the Maisonneuve is open, that they can drive on, so now I always move in the same direction as the driving traffic, of course. So, so this was just a very small part of all the recordings we've made, and we've analyzed in a paper which will be published quite soon. But what I actually also wanted to say was about the use of the camera, because indeed it could be it can sound a bit contradicting. First, I said that the camera was of no use to get any grasp my experience, but well, it was not only the fact that it was good for the CVD and so for research purposes, but I also think that and that's also what I emphasized with my panel at the Visual Literacy Association, is that blindness is not the opposite of visuality. So there is this idea that blindness would be always associated with darkness. That's the classic metaphor. Well, that's usually not the case at all. If you're blind from birth, well, generally then you won't think in terms like darkness and this kind of visual metaphors. And if you have lost sight, like in my case, then you usually go on thinking very visually. I anyway do. So when I move through a city, I make kind of visual map of the city. So this is very, just to say why I thought the camera was a good idea. Another important was when we made these recordings, afterwards when listening to them, you can really, I really discovered a kind of aesthetic aspect, which I didn't have, which I didn't expect. It's like the soundscapes become interesting in itself, and it can also bring back all kinds of memory traces, like a photograph could do for you. If you look to a photograph of a past experience, the soundscapes would do that for me. So it opens up all kinds of new artistic experiments as well, in which we would like to use these binaural recordings. But there are more applications as well.
And let me quickly wrap up. We will, in November, have the opportunity to show these recordings to urban planners during a workshop at McGill. And so we would really put to a test one radical promise of critical disability studies, which is to also use disability as a lens, almost as a method to understand our environment differently and also understand our aspects of our environment better. And the workshop with urban planners will be on urban soundscapes and urban noise. So the idea is really to use blindness to better understand urban noise and the impact of urban noise. Yeah, and during the reception, we will set up a little listening station with several headphones, and we will show the videos. And please come and listen to the binaural recordings after the presentations. Thank you very much.
So, as you will have appreciated, we've been moving from the brain further and further out into the environment. And I'm going to be talking from the standpoint of anthropology. I'm actually leaping ahead in the program. I was supposed to come last, but we've moved me ahead because we're going to take a slight break after my presentation, 5-minute kinesthetic break, because we were worried that the sense of motion was not engaged by any of our, and so, stay tuned, okay? You will have a chance to move around very shortly. So I'm an anthropologist. And I therefore use the methodology of sensory ethnography, or what I like to call participant sensation, to explore the cultural and sensory worlds of other cultures, and also explore the differences between them. This, for example, is, in that regard, a classic Western botanical illustration of a plant, Virola, which is part of the nutmeg family, from which a hallucinogenic snuff is made in Venezuela and other such regions in South America. Now, I didn't do any research in this area, so I have no experience of this plant, but I just want to emphasize how the classic Western way in which to understand plants is to look at their morphology and their color. And all these things are indeed classified and identified in that kind of way. But when I was doing research on medicine and the five senses in northwestern Argentina in the early 1990s, actually it wasn't something that you could rely on visually. I have some samples here, actually. This is one sample of the herbs that I collected. It's called muña muña from one of the curanderas. This is very good for colds and also for sort of raw throats. And I'm going to pass it around so that you can actually smell this sample. But one of the things you'll notice is that you really couldn't identify it visually. Indeed, the point is that the curanderas could identify a huge pharmacopoeia relying exclusively on their sense of smell. Okay, so this is muña muña. It has another use as well. I'll introduce you to that later. So put your head in the bag and take a good sniff, okay? Otherwise, it won't have the desired effect. This is sahumerio, and this is actually incense. This is consumed as a tea. This is one of the incenses that we collected. It wards off evil and bad luck. Okay, so similarly, the distinction between medicine and magic is blurred often in northwestern Argentina, but take a sniff of this and you'll be safe for the rest of the evening. Now, these are just two examples of actually a society in which there are sort of a very high level of olfactory consciousness. And again, you would not be able to identify these plants by their morphology or color. You have to rely on smell. And it was remarkable, the olfactory capacities of the people that we worked with in this project on medicine and the five senses. Now, also in the 1990s, I did fieldwork in Papua New Guinea. I was inspired by a lecture by Marshall McLuhan, which I attended at Trinity College ages ago. And it was the question of whether in oral societies people are more ear-minded, just as, according to McLuhan, in literate societies people are more visually minded. So I went to Papua New Guinea to study this question. I went to a place called Budoya, to a mission station, and this is a shot of the beach and a beach house, a proper dwelling at Budoya. I was not the first white person to be there. Indeed, there had been a mission station there for about 50 years. And also, there was 3 individuals who were there as lay missionaries during the 1950s. Their names were Rosemary, Johannes, and Maria. And their last name was von Trapp. And actually, one of the extraordinary things about going to study an oral society was that I found myself in a place where the hills were alive with the sound of music, and all these memories of Maria and her brother and sister, and how their voices were so extraordinary, and how the choir from Budoya in those days, was able to beat every other choir in the Pacific, even the Tongan missionaries, who could not compete with Maria whatsoever. But I'm not here to talk about sound tonight. I'm here to talk about smell, so I won't talk about this any further. Oh, that's the house that Maria lived in, I'm told. What I'd like to do is shift from the Masim region of Papua New Guinea to halfway up the Sepik River to a village called Tongwenjam. And there I was conducting research, again, on this question of the ear-mindedness of oral societies. And Tongwenjam was a place where my research was funded in part by the Olfactory Research Fund, which contributed money to my sort of voyage, and also contributed from IFF, International Flavors and Fragrances, a series of cards. They looked like credit cards, but they had different colors, and they were also impregnated with different scents. And so I took these scent cards along, and people would say, "Oh, dim-dim." Dim-dim is the word for white. I took offense at that at first, dim-wit, but actually it's just, "Oh, dim-dim, you're at it again, these ridiculous inventions, plastic cards that smell." But it was a very interesting series of experiments that I carried out. One had to do with the smell of rose, and actually it's the red card that you can see here. And I found that consistently people were ranking this smell as the highest. And I thought, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, that here we have a universal. There is a universal preference for the rose smell. But as it turned out, red is a very important culture symbolically in Kwoma culture, and that was what was actually being picked up on. And it turned out that when I hid the samples so that you couldn't see them, you couldn't see the color, then that preference for a rose scent disappeared. So there are no universals. Actually, there is one. We'll come to that in a moment. You also see a white card here. That was coconut. And interestingly, when I was asking people to identify this smell, they didn't point to any of the coconuts on the trees around them, but rather to trade store cookies, which of course were coconut. There was also a yellow card, and it had a lemon scent. And for that, again, not any of the citrus fruits. They didn't mistake this artificial scent for any of the citrus fruits, but rather dishwashing detergent. And that was because these Chinese manufacturers who export soaps all over the world, use the conventional association of cleanness with a lemon scent, and that has become a universal because of the way in which that product is available on a universal scale. So rose, no, not necessarily, but a lemon scent signifying cleanness, you're on. Now, lastly, two other scents. One was wintergreen, which had a green color to it, but more importantly and interestingly, people associated with mijika, which is a kind of wood that they used for building houses. The cinnamon scent was really popular. People would blow out of their noses after they had it. They thought it was too powerful, that this was definitely the stuff of magic, and they wanted to know where I got it so that they could get some more to use it for their own purposes. But their own magic was actually rooted in the use of ginger. And ginger had many uses, one of the most important being that you chewed it to hot up your mouth when you were saying a spell. And in this way, the heat of the spell and the intensity of the words was to ensure whatever result you were seeking. So the power of a spell was actually in its smell, as I found. Also interesting was the way in which the men would actually put a parcel of sort of herbs and ginger in a bag, a little pouch between their heads and the sun, and they would dream of the hunt for the next day. Their dreams scented, as it were, by this smell of ginger. And so ginger, a very powerful substance, mediates lots of relations between animals and humans, as well as between humans themselves. And part of the whole very intricate world of smell that I discovered in the Cuomo Society, which is described in a book I wrote called Sensual Relations. Well, by way of closing, I'd just like to sort of come back to IFF and acknowledge the fact that we have Fiona Carlston with us this evening. I'm not sure, and here's Fiona here. Fiona is a visiting professional. She's with the Center for a sabbatical of a month. Okay, they only get a month in industry for sabbaticals, okay? Compare a year or 6 months that we get, but she has a month. And we've been delighted to have her present to actually talk about her work at IFF Paris as a scent designer. And one of the things that we will actually be doing later is exploring one of her creations. And basically, again, sort of during the reception that we have after this talk, you will be exposed to 2 scents, and you will be asked what color and what texture do these scents evoke in you? Now, these scents have been very carefully crafted, and we found an extraordinary degree of consistency to the answers that my class gave 2 nights ago. We'd like to try that out again and see, exposed to these scents, what color and what texture do you experience? This is the domain of cross-modal associations. Okay? Really, the idea of studying senses one at a time is over. Now, more and more, you find research like what we just heard from Florian and Piet, concerned with cross-modal associations, cross-modal activations, and what kinds of things we can learn from that. And Fiona is also at the forefront of experimenting and trying to discover these links between the senses that are sort of actually, how deeply grounded are they? There are some intriguing questions to be explored there. And so, the idea is that you could actually enhance our experience in one modality through contributing something from another modality. And in this way, I think the future is bright for designers, but also for research and disability as we explore more and more what kind of relations between the senses, and even in cases of double impairment, can be actually investigated and instantiated by way of various products. Okay, so now we've arrived at the moment where Claudine, is going to lead us in exercises that will improve our visual activity, okay? You heard her there that, actually enhanced visual activity with age is not just a question of using your eyes, it's actually how you move, okay? So I'm not going to put her on the spot. You should do a sort of free-form kinesthetic 5 minutes while the last 2 presenters this evening will be setting up because their presentations will have a more performative dimension, okay? So please, you have 5 minutes. Go.
All right, so hello, my name is Jill Ditter, and I'm a professor in the Department of English and a member of the Milieu Institute for Arts, Culture, and Technology. My current research is situated at the intersection of post-colonial studies and the environmental humanities, and my contribution to this discussion tonight centers on 2 of my recent collaborative research creation projects, the Alpine Garden Mist Guide and Layers of Landscape Illuminating the Archive in the Grey Nun's Garden. These projects are linked to my current SSHRC Insight Grant and that explores the use of locative media for engaging visitors to parks, gardens, and nature preserves with stories about climate change, sustainability, and the history of the environment. The Mist Guide is a locative narrative designed to invite visitors of the Montreal Botanical Garden to explore how the history of colonial plant hunting has shaped the design and perception of botanic gardens in the present. And so I'm just going to show you a 90-second video which I've created as a kind of trailer to promote the use of the app in the Botanic Garden.
And it was one thing to hear you talk about it during the panel, yes, and another thing to actually experience it, to really understand what the design, the goal is. Yeah.
Popularity of this style of gardening may have something to do with its link to empire, the naturalizing of alpine plants from colonial regions.
Take out the camera.
Touch it again. Just go touch it. There we go. Now what do you think he would? You know what? I think. You know
represented an expression of power in the metropolitan center.
And I just think it's amazing because you think that technology is going to distance you from your experience. Yeah. I felt it did the opposite.
The Alpine Garden at the Montreal Botanical Garden is over 75 years old.
As the video demonstrates, the app encourages garden visitors to take on the role of a plant hunter, search for a series of QR codes located using GPS signals, and unlock content that explores the history, design, and maintenance of alpine gardens. The pedagogical opportunities afforded by tying the experience of place to reading is a subject that is currently attracting much interdisciplinary interest, as ubiquitous computing and the proliferation of mobile applications are increasingly seen as mediating our ways of moving through and perceiving the world around us. As tools for studying embodied reading practices, the MISGuide plays on the productive hesitation between literary fiction, documentary, audiovisual installation, and site-specific theatrical performance, orchestrated by the use of a locative narrative. The MISGuide exploits the spatial tension between conventionally sedentary modes of literary engagement and more dynamic, continuous, and complex models of spatial interaction that locative technologies allow for in the garden. Well, on the one hand, digital text tied to GPS locations anchor us in the garden and make it harder for us to get lost in the action of absorbing the app's content. On the other, the archival and creative texts unlocked by the MISGuide's QR codes pull us away from the garden and invite us to consider different ways of perceiving our environment. The transitive reading practice that the MISGuide encourages, therefore, creates a digital palimpsest that layers reading on top of real space in an interactive way and forges what Andrew Piper describes as corporeal connections between what we've seen and where we've seen it. As users open the app, they are presented with an animated field notebook and invited to embark on a plant hunting expedition. The GPS-enabled compass guides the user towards 9 different QR codes installed throughout the garden, which are scanned to unlock a series of fictitious botanical drawings linked to jigsaw puzzle pieces. Flowers in the expedition drawings fall away from the screen if touched and remind us that plant hunting involved the extraction and transport of the plants away from the landscape in which they were found. Once all 9 jigsaw pieces are collected, they can be assembled to reveal an imaginary alpine landscape, a reminder of the elsewhere that is always in tension with the collection housed at the garden. By juxtaposing the botanic archive with the visitor's embodied experience of the garden, the MISGuide disrupts the smooth optics of tourism associated with popular garden culture and redirects the visitor's attention to the garden's relationship to colonial history. Layers of Landscape is a site-specific installation project I recently collaborated on with artist Carolyn Alexander as part of a larger curatorial project conceptualized by Cynthia Hammond and Shauna Jansen. As a vehicle to bring the archive into the garden, 25 lanterns were created, each hosting a different assemblage of images, including archival photos of the food-producing garden cultivated by the nuns, photos of experts of the nuns' ledger books where the monetary value of the produce was meticulously noted, and a selection of drawings of pre-colonial indigenous plant life from the Codex Canadensis, a manuscript by Louis Nicolas, a Jesuit missionary who visited New France from 1664 to 1667. The lanterns juxtapose the archival materials related to the Grey Nun's Garden with Nicolas' early drawings to offer a history of the Grey Nun's labor in the garden, while at the same time acknowledging visually that this is part of the settler colonial history of this area.
My name is Cynthia Hammond, and I am, I'm looking at your bio, I am Associate Professor in Art History here at Concordia University.
Hello, and my name is Shona Jansen, and I'm a visiting artist in the theater department. It's funny that I should have to read that, but anyway. Tonight we will be talking about our urban curatorial collaboration called Un paradis sans pommières, le jardin des sœurs grises. Yes, okay, it's me. Okay. Urban curating is a term I use to describe my practice in collaborations with artists in the making of site-responsive, performative public artworks and events. I have collaborated with artists working across the disciplines of the performing and visual arts, architecture and design, and socially and community-engaged practices. Most of my projects take place within the contested spaces of the city, unresolved architectural and urban conditions, deindustrialized and marginalized neighborhoods. Urban curating is also a term I was introduced to through the work of Dutch artist Jean van Heeswijk and architect Mieke Schock. For van Heeswijk, urban curating is a mode of radicalizing the local. And for Schock, she has also framed this term urban curating as an interfering movement to dominant urban planning and design strategies. We approach urban curating as a mode of intervention in the urban realm, and how, as a critical spatial practice, to use Jane Randell's term, the histories of urban places might be active collaborators with artists in the surfacing of significant pasts, sublimated political positions, and forms of spatial and cultural agency, including the agencies of the built and unbuilt environment itself.
This past summer, Shona and I worked as urban curators at Concordia's Grey Nuns Mother House. Our context for this curatorial collaboration was the Association of Critical Heritage Studies meeting, which was taking place in Montreal in early June. And the idea behind this conference is that the participants really consider heritage from critical and creative perspectives. And so we were very lucky to have our project chosen as one of several signature projects to represent Concordia's Faculty of Fine Arts and beyond in terms of creative engagements with heritage. And what better site we felt than to look at Concordia's heritage jewel, which would be the Grey Nuns Mother House. Our site in particular, however, was not the gorgeous gray stone building, but rather the large locked garden to the north of the main building, a place rich in the history of women's knowledge and labor. That knowledge and labor remain, however, invisible in the garden's present state, where no signs of its past life as a working garden can be found, and no signs of the fact that the garden is and was built on unceded indigenous land can be found as well. Art historian Mi-Wang Kwan argues that for art to be site responsive, it must attend to the history, cultural politics, and current realities of a given place. For me, for us, this raises the question of how people use, remember, and contest a given location. Inspired by archival research about the garden, part of which Jill mentioned, we asked 14 artists to engage with this site as it is today. As artists, their challenge was to make palpable, not just visible, but palpable, the gendered history of the garden for one night. And I'm hoping we can see the video.
So this is the part of the presentation where we come to our senses. And while we wish we had the time to actually speak to all of the artists' work in this project in the Grey Nuns, we can't. So we're going to draw a focus to a couple of works and tie this into how the senses emplace us, to use one of the words I learned from David many years ago. In the video, you'll have seen the collaborative performance given by choreographer Angelique Wilkie, who moves with great precision along the earth path drawn by artist Sofia Baraska. The sensory mediums used here, the labor of drawing through body gesture and walking with earth and water, emplaced us, the public, in the invisible colonial histories of the garden and those politics.
The Grey Nuns cultivated their garden for food and profit, and for medicinal purposes. Our research assistant Ariane Legault found detailed planting lists in the nuns' archives, lists which became the basis for a project by ceramic artist Linda Swanson and performance artist Swintack. You may have noticed in the video a moment where there look like very delicate white leaves are being attached to a plinth, and then later a moment when people pluck leaves off the plinth and they are then used as a receptacle for liquid which they sip. So Swanson created 200 of these porcelain leaves, these tiny vessels, and they became the means by which Swintack could share a teaspoon of a mysterious amber liquid. This was a medicinal tincture, a literally intoxicating concoction. I wonder if Graham Carr is still here, because we didn't actually have permission for that part. Brewed from plants that the nuns used to grow in this very same place. The gritty tooth of the unglazed porcelain mixed with this sip of earthy spirits, producing an utterly unfamiliar experience on the tongue. But even more, the project linked with great immediacy the intimate terrain of visitors' mouths, their sense of taste, and the history of this place. So in this way, our several hundred participants came closer to women's history by coming to their senses in our night of interdisciplinary curated enchantment. Thank you.
Well, I'll start talking maybe while you do the switch. That's fine, yeah. Hello, everybody. We're going to switch screens for my presentation, so I'll just introduce what I'm going to do, and we'll let that happen. So my name is Owen Chapman. I'm from the Department of Communication Studies, and I have other affiliations here at the university. I'm part of the new Milieu Institute, and I co-direct the Community and Differential Mobilities Cluster with Juliana Cuccinelli. And I also am the chair of the Critical Disability Studies Working Group here at Concordia, so some of my colleagues from that group have presented to us already today. And lastly, I co-direct the Mobile Media Lab with my colleague Kim Sawchuk. The work that I'm going to be showing today comes out of the lab directly. So it's some sound software that's been custom built in the context of the Mobile Media Lab. So I'll explain a little bit how it works while we get the screen set up. The name of the software is Echoscape. Beyond being involved in critical disability studies and mobility studies, I'm a DJ and electronic music composer. And for many years have been invested in soundscape composition and the history and theory of soundscape studies. One of the things that I've noted along the way is soundscape composition, which has a long and important history here in Canada, has not had a lot of interaction with popular musical forms, the kind of forms of music that I DJ and I produce as an electronic musician. So one of my ambitions is to try to bring these genres together a little bit. I'm also committed to locative media, and the software that you're going to be seeing today is a form of locative media. So it's called Echoscape, and the technical details are that Echoscape uses the Unity gaming engine. So for people who are programmers, it looks like a video game, and you'll see it in a second. But instead of shooting monsters, you're searching through landscapes for hidden sound files. Those sound files have been produced using another software that was developed in the Mobile Media Lab called AudioMobile. And AudioMobile is an iOS app. It's an app for the iPhone that allows you to make audio recordings and take a picture and then upload those files to a database. Those files are also at that moment tagged with their GPS coordinates. So within the database, those files have locative data attached to them, and that can be visualized in a variety of ways. So we have a two-dimensional map that allows you to see pinpoints of where the sound files were recorded and access the images. But Echoscape is trying to put this into a three-dimensional space. So Echoscape uses the sound files recorded in AudioMobile. It then grabs open source data from OpenStreetMaps and also topographical data, and it layers that all together and builds a quick simulation, a 3D simulation of the actual recording space. The simulation, as you'll see, is very abstract. And then so the user moves through the simulation like you would a video game and triggers and activates sounds to produce both a representation of the original soundscape, but also a playful arena in which they can move around and affect the sounds dramatically. So what I'm going to be presenting today is a practice that I've developed using this software and performing in various places around the world. As a DJ, I like to have other things to utilize when I'm mixing. The other problem with Echoscape is that it's a volatile custom software and it often crashes. Given that I'm in front of all my colleagues and peers here at the university, today's the day it will probably crash, so I'm warning you in advance. But I do have other sound files that I mix into the set, including beats and musical compositions that I've made principally using my cell phone. So we can maybe talk about this later in the reception period if people are curious, but I have a practice of situated composition where I use cell phones and mobile devices. I have colleagues with whom I do this kind of work, notably Sam Tulin, who was a PhD student here for a long time. He came up with that term, situated composition. And so some of the pieces that you'll be hearing me mix in with the soundscape files that'll be remixed are fully fledged compositions, but they were made with mobile phones and they were made using a lot of field recordings. And then there's also some piano in there because I just love the sound of the piano. And we can talk later about the piano as a soundscape instrument because I have some theories around that. So if we're kind of ready to test, I'll move on over.
Just a couple of things by way of wrapping up. One is that this herb, muña muña, in Quechua means love, love. Okay, so if you had a warm feeling toward anybody in this room, it was an effect of this plant. Okay, it's a lovely plant. You should consume it all the time. This evening isn't over yet, in that Florian and Piet will be demonstrating their sonic boundary object during the reception that follows, and also Fiona and I will be telling you what the colors, actually you're going to experience them themselves, the colors and the textures that are contained in these two scents. Okay, so we are going to be exploring further cross-modality. What have we witnessed tonight? Well, we've witnessed the extraordinary diversity and richness of sense-based research here at Concordia. We've seen research on vision and research on hearing. We have heard about research using sound, using sight and other senses to explore the world. And it's not only sense-based research, but also sense-based research creation in the extraordinary installations, experiences that Cynthia and Jill and Shauna and also Owen have given us by way of concluding this evening. So we've gone from the brain to the creation of these total multisensory atmospheres, so rich, so invigorating. And in that regard, thank you for your attention this evening. We're going to hold questions until the reception. I'm just going to now turn the mic over to André and thank him for this idea, for this extraordinary set of talks beyond disciplines.
Thank you so much, David. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is Beyond Disciplines. And I just want to thank everyone who have sort of contributed to this fantastic journey, un voyage. It was also, as a geographer, a geographical voyage, as we touched upon Italy, Ireland, Montreal, Guinea-Papouasie, where we discovered actually that the universal scent is citrus, which is a fantastic kind of thought. But beyond that, I think this gathering, as David just said, it's about diversity of what we do, and in the sense of coming to senses. And to me, that sort of, it's not just about the research we do, however we approach it, it's about our own discovering of the world. And we have fantastic examples of that tonight from all perspectives. One thing I'd like to say is to each one of you, from David, Owen, Cynthia, Shauna, Jill, Claudine, Aaron, Rona, Piet, and Jordan, Florian. It's how extraordinary that all of this came about, not just because of a research topic, but also a personal experience. And that sharing to us is perhaps even more memorable as we will remember this event that happened tonight. We also need to thank a few other people, and some of them have been sort of active tonight because we have a podcast team. We had one last year, and this year we have Simone and Aaron. We're actually actively tweeting tonight, and they will be creating the podcast of all of those season 2 episodes. The season 1 is available on SoundScape. SoundCloud. I'm too much in Scape now. So, and you'll find it on the soundcloud.com page. There's a page about Beyond Discipline. And it will become available as well in terms of iTunes, Podcast Store, and all kinds of other access. So you're welcome to take a look at that. I'd like also to thank our AV team tonight. They did a fantastic job at creating this environment. And Liz for being part of that behind-the-scene organization, which makes this thing possible every time. Now, there's a reception. The reception is the Q&A as well, but also experimenting further, even further. I know each one of you personally, so I want to see you up there. I know it's the same joke every time, but I do know each one of you. So you're all welcome on the 11th floor of this building, but you have to go out here and just a little down there, and then you take the elevator, and you're all welcome. This is a Q&A and experience continuing, so thank you so much for being here tonight, and keep on enjoying the coming to Census. All right, thank you.